You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative. And here to talk with me about the assembled Avengers is John Mills.
Indeed, I am still pondering to this day if Spider-Man had to be super careful about where he landed on the streets or on the walls in New York City, because you want to talk about a lot of transmissible surfaces you don't want to touch, Spider-Man is swinging onto them. But that's just
This
me.
is true. This is
It
true.
is very true.
And I never thought about that, but now I'm really just worried about his health. But hopefully, being a bitten by a genetic spider, he's got a really good immune system, I'm hoping. So that's what keeps him from getting sick all the time and just, having to call in with the flu because, he was swinging on whatever surface in Queens.
Forget the flu. I'm worried about him calling in with hepatitis or something. I'm much more worried about that.
Well, I'm excited to be here because we're going to talk about Spider-Man Homecoming as we are here in Phase 3 of the MCU. Before we dive into the conversation, of course, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd really appreciate it if you subscribe. You'll get the shows as soon as they drop. Plus, if you're on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, please give us a star rating. And, of course, on Apple Podcasts, you can also give us a written review. Help more people find the show. Of course, you can also find us on Twitter at the 602 Club. We're on Instagram under the 602 Club TFM. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM, as well as our website at trek.fm. You can go to the contact section there and send us an email if you'd like. And we'd like to encourage you to go over to Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM and support the network so all of these shows can keep coming to you and we can grow. Can't grow without listeners like you. So again, that is patreon.com/TrekFM. So, John, the last time we saw Spider-Man, he had been in Civil War. And so we knew we were going to be getting more Spider-Man. And so, as we were coming into this movie, then, were you excited about the prospect of getting Tom Holland in a Spider-Man movie, especially since, in all honesty, we had just had a couple of Spider-Man movies previously with a different Spider-Man. And so were you hopeful coming in from Civil War that this was going to be more your speed, maybe?
Well, everybody was super excited for for anything with Spider-Man. At the end of Civil War, they have the stinger say, Spider-Man will return. And I remember the theater being electric about it and saying, yes, exactly. And so, I was pretty interested, right? But I also knew that there had been plenty of movies that I wasn't thrilled with that were Spider-Man movies. So, burn me once, shame on you. Burn me twice, shame on me. Burn me a third time. Hold on a second. Hold on. I'm waiting before I touch the stove. But the thing is, while I was excited, 2017 was an eventful year, especially the summer of 2017, because I moved. I changed states with the whole family, and so it was very tumultuous. So I didn't get a chance to see it in the theater. Did you rush out to the theater?
At this point, yes, I'm seeing all the Marvel movies in the theater, and I will, as we move forward, just because I was definitely on the train. And at that point, too, here, I'm in the 602 Club. I'm doing the show, so we're covering them on the 602 Club itself. So I am going to the theater to see these films, and coming into this, I was probably much different than a lot of people because I wasn't a huge fan of his appearance in Civil War. And so I was trepidatious coming into this, but I was hopeful that I would enjoy Tom Holland here in his solo film, and because I liked him. I mean, I did. I liked him. I thought he was a great kid. Seemed like he could really pull this off. And so I was hopeful coming into the film because of that. So,
by the way, I did take a look to see the specific release date. It was 6 days after I had switched states, which means it was only a few days since the first time you and I had actually shared air, because that's when we met our friend Nick out there in California. So isn't that crazy? Because we saw,
it was awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. But anyway, wow, time flies, doesn't it? I mean, but at the same time, this movie only came out 5 years ago. So, like, what impact was there for you? Was this one of those ones where it was, I mean, when I finally got around to it, which was substantially later, I had somewhat of a tepid reaction to it. Your first reaction was?
It was very tepid. I mean, in all honesty, I look back at my rating for this on Letterboxd, and it was 2.5. So that's like, to me, if I rate something 2.5, I would always consider it half a good movie. And there were some things that really, in all honesty, for me, led me to feel like that. And so coming back to it, whether or not that's different is interesting. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is they make a very clear choice in this film to not touch Peter's origin. We don't talk about Uncle Ben. We only minorly reference him once. And we don't do any of the things that are associated with, the lessons for Peter about great responsibility, yada, yada, yada. We just don't touch any of that. And how did you feel about that after seeing the movie? Because that's the core of the Spider-Man character, is that kind of tragedy and heartbreak and overcoming those things. And that's not something this movie deals with at all.
I was happy about it, honestly. Look, this is the same difficulty that Batman movies face, where when they reboot a series, how they handle that origin story, there's a lot of weight. And I think it's wise to sidestep it because, number one, Uncle Ben, they'd already rebooted the series once before this. So this is the third time we're encountering Spider-Man since the early 2000s. There is a meta level of awareness that the target audience is going to come in with. And whether you think it's good storytelling or not, I think it's just common sense that you have to say, we can't annoy these people. They get it. If we, no matter how magnificently they do the scene, there is absolutely no emotional payoff that can come with it at this point, because audiences are going to sit there and say, yeah, I know this part. And you're just going to tune out. It doesn't matter. That's just how it's going to work. And that's why each movie that reboots a series tries to do, okay, we're going to do a different spin on it. I think it's a brilliant decision just not to bother. Because Peter is Peter. And he's going to be Peter Parker no matter what. So exploring the relationship with Aunt May, who's a decidedly different characterization of Aunt May than the one I grew up with. I mean, Aunt May was like elderly back when I was growing up. And Marissa Tomei, is it just that we've gotten older? And so Aunt May seemed elderly? But I mean, you go to any comic book or anything like that, there's a definite difference.
No, I think that this Aunt May, regardless of how old or young you were, she was still much younger. I mean, so it definitely was very different in the way that they kind of treat the character. And I think I like what you said about not touching the story, and I think that's one of the things that I feel much differently now. Part of that is in hindsight because of the other Spider-Man movies that we've had, especially No Way Home, where this character and the way he's being presented in the MCU, that lesson was coming. It was just coming later, right? And in some ways, I made the mistake that a lot of people did, and I'll admit this, I made the mistake with this film of judging it the same way a lot of people did with Man of Steel. They just wanted the character to be what they, expected and not allow him to grow. And I made that mistake. I freely admit that here. So in hindsight, that's one of the things that plays much better in this film is that's I know that that's coming, and so I can actually kind of see where they're kind of bringing this character and where they're working on his characterization in a way that is different and yet is still kind of leading him to a place where he'll have that major moment of realization. This movie specifically, though, and I wanted to ask you about this, is basically an MCU John Hughes film. Like, it's all about the high school drama and and Peter really dealing with the reality that, one, this kid is a sophomore in high school, and what it would be like to have these powers as a sophomore in high school and barely be figuring out who you are as a person in the first place, let alone a superhero.
It's a very interesting, it's a very fresh take. It's the closest, up to this point where we've watched things. This is the closest that they have attempted at this point to get a character as close as possible to the way they appear in the original comics. And because Peter was always an awkward teen who was super smart, never really in an accepted circle of, popular friends or anything like that. And a lot of the stuff is smartly updated to speak to more modern times. I know that there were some people where it was a challenge for them because the high school life that Peter lives is not familiar to them. And it's one of those things where, it was a worthwhile discussion to say, well, times are different now, right? That's why Flash isn't the big hulking football player that you remember. It's smart to change him because it's a different time. And that type of character is cringy now and very stock. But I thought I like the way you put it, that it's like an MCU John Hughes film. I can see that definitely. Unfortunately, I think that there's something lost in the translation where the Hughes movies were done in such a way that Hughes was still the Hughes movies they're still like a step removed between you and the characters, whereas this movie I think makes a lot of effort to try to get you to feel like you're their age. It seems weird, but do you understand what I'm saying there, where it's like the movie is regarding its audience as younger than me, and I think that is a little bit tricky for it to try to navigate.
I think I understand what you're saying. And I do feel as though this movie is trying to place you in the shoes of Peter, and in a way that necessarily the Hughes movies aren't, mainly because the Hughes movies, those kids don't come off as actual kids. They come off as vaguely adult in kids' bodies, and that, the things they're saying and the things they're doing are all more adult than they are necessarily like an actual teenager at the time. And here, I mean, when you have Peter and Ned sitting there talking about, have we seen that outfit on Liz before? That skirt, but not with that top, that's the kind of thing that two teenage boys who kind of pay attention to a girl might be having that conversation. That's not an adult conversation. That's a teenage boy conversation, right? And
Yeah,
or
that's true.
just even the way that the boys react to one another when, Ned is in his room and Peter's crawling on the ceiling, comes down, and Ned just freaks out, drops the thing, and they kind of like, there's not anything like quippy being said. That he's like, what is it? He's like trying to get words out, because he doesn't have the perfect phrase on his tongue. This movie does, I think, a lot of those things with the kids that feels more real. Even Flash, like being a complete jerk, but the things that he calls Peter, like, it's total teenage boy. He thinks he's so smart because he's calling Peter Penis Parker.
Yeah.
Like that's a teenage boy thinking he's hilarious because he said the word penis instead of Peter. So I think there is the kind of like framework of this idea of a Hughes movie, but it brings it down to earth and makes the kids more relatable in many ways, because I think we are meant to feel the awkwardness of Peter. We're meant to feel the awkwardness of what it would be like to be a teenage boy who had just found puberty a couple of years ago and now has hit a whole new type of puberty with like the ultimate puberty, becoming a superhero. And so it's like, it's meant to be uber awkward. And even like the way they play MJ in this movie, like she's super awkward. Like nobody in this movie is really cool.
Yeah, and I know there were people that had problems with the fact that they basically, for lack of a better term, updated MJ. She's supposed to be a turbo hot, redheaded future supermodel sort of, vibe going on there, and they make a very conscious choice to move away from that.
Yeah.
But given
and
all
she'll
of those
never
things,
actually be the MJ we know. I mean,
no, she won't.
So yeah,
I'm grateful for stuff like that because it makes sense. That's a sort of update where it's like, yeah, I mean, you're making the character more interesting. Why wouldn't you want to do that? But I don't know. Maybe the thing is, maybe what the big hurdle I have is it really seems to be the Iron Man show featuring Peter Parker. And that is sort of the thing that I wrestle with throughout this movie.
Okay, so I'm glad that you brought up Iron Man. My major issue with the movie beforehand, and still my major issue with the movie, is that we continue to de-evolve the character of Tony Stark for plot reasons instead of where the character is supposed to be. So Age of Ultron has happened, Civil War has happened, and this does kind of continue the fact that, he mentions like people were like, you brought a teenager, and like they touch on that, but it's like he's learned nothing. Tony is incapable of changing at this point because they want to continue to pigeonhole him as this like playboy who can never grow up. And it's very frustrating because it's almost as if, and you like to say this, and I give you full credit for it, that, the Last Jedi is as if the Return of the Jedi never happened. This is like Iron Man 3 never happened.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating because this character, and I'm going to go on a soapbox, so just bear with me.
Ooh, I love it when you go on a soapbox.
Tony is a character who wants to take no responsibility for even his own actions. And so when he comes to Peter at the end and was like, oh, it was like a trial by fire. It's basically like the Jedi with Ahsoka at the end of her arc in season 5. Like, oh, well, this is what the Force meant for you. And it's like, that is the biggest bunch of BS I've ever heard. You didn't know that. You didn't think that. You're just trying to cover up for the fact that you're not wanting to take responsibility for your own actions. And nobody wants to take this kid and be the father that he needs to teach him how to, one, be a man, and two, how to be a superhero. The best father figure he has in this movie is Karen. Which is pathetic that Karen, the AI, is the only one here to kind of listen to him, to treat him like an actual human being and someone who's worthy of being trained. Like, even Happy is like talking down. So I get so upset with this movie for that one specific reason, that we won't allow Tony to come in and actually have the mentorship role. And that way, when he is yelling at him and mad at him for what happens on the ferry, it would have so much more weight if they had been spending a lot of time together and Peter still makes the mistake.
Right.
Whereas here, it's like, Peter's absolutely right. No, Tony, this is your fault. You weren't there. You wouldn't believe me. You weren't listening, and you weren't talking to me. So how's Peter supposed to know?
But see, that even gets to your point about it becomes more concerned with advancing Iron Man than it does with advancing Peter.
Well, but it's not advancing Iron Man, because he's literally just the same character he was.
Yeah, but having the argument, you could make an argument that at the end of the movie, Iron Man is, once again, they regress him and then they take him back to where he's supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So he just keeps taking, one step forward, two steps back sort of thing. Although, I mean, if somebody wanted to mount a defense where they said, well, isn't that what human nature is like? It's like, okay. I mean, it's a fair argument that people don't always progress in a linear fashion. They go forward, then they fall back sort of thing. I get that.
But in a series like this, right, you do want your characters to feel, and just to play devil's advocate on that, obviously, as we've progressed with the character of Captain America, he continues to grow and to change, and in the sense that, like, he's become disillusioned with things he used to think he could believe in, but he stayed core to the truth of who Captain America is and what he believes in the sense of, like, the things that are right and wrong and all that kind of stuff. But there's been progression with that character in a good fashion, whereas, like, it's like with Iron Man, like you said, like, yeah, you can go back and forth, but when you're doing these type of movies, the character really needs to move forward almost not in a realistic fashion. We need the character to just continue to grow and to evolve. And he's kind of evolving, and then he's de-evolved, and, like, he won't really evolve again, I feel like, until we finally get to, the last two films that he's in, with Infinity War and Endgame. And it's just
spoilers.
It never feels
I'm kidding.
It never feels like a great cohesive story for the Iron Man character in the end. And this is one of the biggest places where that's the case.
I also think, I'll also throw out there that it bothered me in a lot of ways, not just because I'm a fan who read Spider-Man comics in the 80s and 90s, and I'm a Spider-Man fan who watched Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends with Firestar and Iceman and stuff like that. But giving him, you mentioned Karen the AI, giving Spider-Man basically a version of what could be called the Iron Spider suit this early in the game. This is where the conflicting impulses are a problem, is that since we rob Peter of that origin story, showing him lose Uncle Ben and move forward, when he gets that super suit from Iron Man, it doesn't feel earned the way that it should. Of, okay, you've been doing this without this, that's why you screwed up this time, here's your suit, it gets better, right? Do you think this movie, but at the same time, let's talk about it this way. Do you think they're painted into a corner? Because given that Iron Man exists here, you'd be asking the whole time, why isn't he giving him a super suit? Right?
Where is my super suit?
Exactly.
No, I do think that you're absolutely right. They have painted themselves into a corner, and we've already seen a super suit that he's been given. And so the fact that Peter just continues to have the suit, from where we saw him the first time in Civil War makes sense. And this is an area to which I was much more frustrated, I think, previously than I am now in retrospect because of where we go in No Way Home, is that we are moving the character towards kind of a slower origin, a slower coming into being the Spider-Man that we know. And part of the learning process is this. And again, I mean, it's like if he didn't have this suit, who would be there like helping this kid at all, And and the thing that's really interesting about it is that, normally in the Spider-Man movies, Peter learns on his own, right? Like,
yep.
But here, he doesn't need to be learning on his own because he's supposed to have other people around him, but he's told, one, he's not good enough, and two, that he just needs to work his way up from, the JV squad basically to, and I think what's fascinating to me is that the character who really does learn the lesson here is Peter in the end. He basically tells Tony, I don't want to be you right now. I'm not ready to be you. He's learned a lesson that even Tony hasn't learned yet, which is, at least Tony did learn it and then he forgot it. But I that's one thing that I was really impressed with this movie is that at the end of this movie, Peter makes an extremely mature decision in saying no to Tony and saying no to being a part of the Avengers and continuing to be the neighborhood Spider-Man because he realizes he does have a lot to learn. He's allowed his pride to be humbled enough to say, I'm not ready for that yet, but I will be. I'm working on it, but not yet. And, when you juxtapose that against the characterization of Tony, it's phenomenal how different that is.
Yes. I'm glad you mentioned, his decision at the end. I want to be the neighborhood Spider-Man, the Spider-Man we're all familiar with. But at the same time, do you think it speaks to the fact that Spider-Man doesn't belong in the MCU in a sense? Because his personal struggle and his powers very much are more suited to a single comic continuity where it's Spider-Man versus his enemies and not one wherein the other people exist, which is maybe it's limited thinking or something, but do you think it's just something that, not for a little while at least, this character exists in such a way that can be resolved to the fact that it's a limited world character dropped into an unlimited film universe?
That's an interesting question. And I think the film in many ways does kind of deal with that. Because we see how useless Peter's powers are in the suburbs. And how useless his powers are out. I mean, Peter's powers literally only are the most effective in a city like New York, especially in Midtown Manhattan. They're not even as great in Queens, because there's no tall buildings to swing off of. It just, it's, so when they literally do the thing where he's running across the golf course and there's nothing for him to swing on, or he's trying to make his way through the neighborhood and there's not a lot for him to really swing on and effectively move. It's like this character's powers are kind of pointless, And so I think you do have a real, a good point in that, because this is a character who works in specific locations, which will be really interesting when we talk about Far From Home and he's in London. So, but
which I'll be seeing for the first time on Assembling Avengers.
That's crazy.
Isn't it?
But I think the thing that it would have been great for me in this film that if it had done was allowed this to be a movie about Tony and Peter growing. And I think this could have been a movie where, and maybe they were afraid of having too much Tony in the movie, but he already overshadows it. So to me, it's better. It's like The Force Awakens putting Luke Skywalker off because we don't want him to overshadow the movie, and yet he overshadows the entire movie regardless. And so it's like, just use the character instead of pretending like he's not around or finding ways to like push him to the side, because it would be better for both characters actually to get them to where they need to be by the end of the film. And, you know, I do think that the strongest moment again here for the character of Spider-Man is that beautiful moment where he's being crushed by a building and he's not sure if he can do it. And he wills himself to push the building up and to do the thing that nobody believes that he can do, which is to help save the day, because nobody will pay attention to him. But he knows what he needs to do, because if this stuff gets into the wrong hands, it's going to be not only bad for his part of the country, but it's going to be bad for everyone involved. And so this is where I think they are kind of building in that idea of like Peter seeing that with great power comes great responsibility. We never say that in the movie, but we portray it with Peter being willing to do the right thing for the right reasons, even if nobody else is going to pay attention to him.
Let me ask you a question, just so long as we're on the topic. About Peter's growth and everything. Do you think that Iron Man's presence, because we're talking about that part of it too, do you think that it winds up overshadowing the very terrific job that Michael Keaton does playing Vulture? Do you think that they take time away from the villain that could have given the villain a lot of time to shine in order to have Tony there instead?
I don't think so. Because especially in the rewatch that I had here, I was really impressed with the job that Keaton does. And I was also impressed with the way the movie paints him to be more sympathetic by making him a guy who's just trying to do his job. You know, he's just trying to get along in life. And the big corporate powers that be, or political powers, kind of come in and squash that and almost take away his whole livelihood. And he feels, quote unquote, and it's not really true, but he, you know, because nobody's forced to be in crime, but he feels forced to choose a decision he wouldn't normally choose. And then, of course, at the very end, right, in the stinger, he has the choice of whether or not he will betray who Peter is or be more virtuous. And he chooses to not betray Peter, because that's not what this has been about. And so I think the performance that Keaton gives is so good, because really he's just a guy that feels forced into a corner and is just trying to provide for his family and protect his family at the same time. And he ends up, you know, making some wrong decisions, but ultimately he's not all bad, you know, like there's still good in him.
Oh no, I definitely think Keaton's great, and he breathes life into a character that the average person does not even know exists in the Spider-Man lore. People know Doc Ock, people know Green Goblin, people arguably know Hobgoblin, because Hobgoblin is really just, you know, oh no, we killed Green Goblin, we need something else. Hobgoblin, okay. But there is a I just think that there's a sense that Keaton does a terrific job. He elevates that character into somebody I want to watch. They do take him on an interesting journey, but it's like the movie is overloaded with characters because you have Iron Man in it. Right? Like, this is the story of Peter finding his way. You've got his relationship with MJ. You've got his relationship with his friend. You've got his arch nemesis. And it's just one of those things, again, where, I don't know. I mean, I agree with you about Keaton, but I just struggle with this, that he would have had even more to do. There would have been more focus on him.
I was in the rewatch. I remembered there being more Iron Man. There's actually less than I remembered. But again, I think it's just that he overshadows the movie because you're constantly reminded of him because of Peter's suit, and because of Karen, being an extension of like this Tony creation, so he's never far from your mind. But, yeah, I mean, and Keaton really takes this role and makes it something that's pretty phenomenal, that in lesser hands wouldn't be great. You needed somebody with this, like, he just comes in and he chews up the scenery, and I think it's fantastic. So, what did you think about Ned, and the relationship he has with Peter, and just the character himself, the actor, everything there? How did that end up working for you, with him being the guy in the chair?
Just fantastic, actually. I thought it was great. I really do. I think one of the strongest suits of the movie is that they cast so incredibly well. And Ned becomes a best friend character. I look forward to seeing him because he's so great with it. And he's so fun, while at the same time he's comic relief without being overbearing. And that cannot be overvalued in a movie. Like, we've talked about the comedy problem in the MCU. This character and the way that it's Jacob Batalon, I think that's how you pronounce the last name, Jacob Batalon, the way he plays the character is so right on what you need for the role, but also his chemistry with Tom Holland is genuine. I believe that these guys are best friends.
Yeah, I like that you said that, because I think one of the things that they do with the character, and it's so smart, is that he's never jealous of Peter having these powers. He lives vicariously and is enjoying his best friend having these powers. And I think that's something that's fun. And it's like he knows, instead of being, again, the jealous friend, he kind of knows his place where he's like, oh man, I could help you out. I could be the guy in the chair, because he knows what he's good at and how he could best help his friend. And it's not about that kind of pettiness that you get in so many superhero type films. Like, honestly, I think of the previous Spider-Man movies. And of course, when Harry Osborn learns who Peter is, right, he gets jealous. And, there's none of that. And like you said, Jacob is just so great as Ned. He's so likable, and he's so fun as a person. And like you said, that the chemistry that they have, where they've got their special handshake, and they feel like teenage boys. They like to play with Legos, and they look longingly at girls that they'll never get to have because they're not cool enough for a senior. I mean, just like. It's cute. It's real cute. It's the kind of thing where it's like, I hang out with a lot of teenagers working with a youth group at church, and it's like, these are the kind of kids you want to be with even as an adult, because they're just like, they're awkwardly comfortable in their own skin, which sounds weird, but like, these kids kind of know who they are in some ways, and they're not afraid to just like be themselves. I don't know. It's just really good. And I think what I'm trying to say is I really appreciate the writing of them, because it comes across as genuine, instead of like, we're going to pretend like they're more adult than they actually are at this time period. So Yeah.
I feel like you've taken too many unnecessary shots at the works of John Hughes in this episode. I'm going to have to throw a challenge flag on that one. But you know what? Hey, let me throw a curveball at this point, because I love to do that. We keep saying, MCU John Hughes movie and stuff like that, and writing the teen characters as real teens. A big important part of everybody's life, especially when they're a teenager, is music. So the music in this movie, do you think it's successful? Do you think that the score is memorable? Do you have a theme here that, let's be honest, nothing will ever top the old cartoon theme for Spider-Man does whatever. You're talking stuff written from the TV jingles era, and that you're just never going to find anything that's an earworm of the same sort.
Yeah.
But do you think this music works? Do you think it's one of the better MCU soundtracks, or is it just your average MCU soundtrack where it just fits the bill?
So,
it does enough.
I love that you asked this, because one, the needle drops in this movie are fantastic. Absolutely great needle drops. When you've got like Spoon in there and stuff like that, just phenomenal. They choose great music in that. We thought that Michael Giacchino's music was good for Doctor Strange, but here he does something really smart. He basically takes that Spider-Man, and turns that into a theme here. And it's just great. Like, it's actually really good. I can remember it. I can hum it. And his music in this movie is vibrant and joyful and fun, and it's a great soundtrack, and it might be one of the best of the MCU, honestly. Like, I didn't remember that to be the case, but he really made something by kind of combining the old and making it kind of new. And yeah, he captures the spirit of what's happening on screen wonderfully. And the music itself is just kind of more fun and bouncy, and like, I really, really enjoy it. I didn't remember that at all about this, but I'm impressed. So
I agree that the score is very good. Giacchino, however you
however you say it.
However, I'll call him Mikey. His scores, I don't think I've ever heard him make a bad one. And I agree with you. There's a lot of energy in this one, and that he has a real gift. And I think it's because of a lot of the TV work that he did as well, with Lost and everything. He knows how to get the sting in there. He knows how to get the audience's attention and sort of manipulate you emotionally a lot of the time. But I don't know that I think it's one of the best. I have to think about that. It's good. I don't consider it great. But at the same time, when I look back on the different themes of everything, it's at least above average. It at least achieves more than what your typical MCU score does. So yeah, I give the music good marks. I do. It works well.
So you're like Chris Pine in, Wonder Woman, where he's like above average.
Oh no. You know what? Let's save that for a DCEU.
Okay.
Podcast that
so
where we'll talk about that. Yeah.
What did you think about the effects in this movie?
Oh, they were good. I have no complaint about them. They're good. I think that Sony knew that they have to impress the audience at this point, because wasn't there a contingent? My perception was that people were skeptical whether Sony could pull off something that Marvel had done. because, at this point, the Marvel juggernaut is rolling, and this is not Marvel, this is not the Marvel owned by Disney doing this. This is the partnership with Sony. So I think there was some skepticism about whether Sony could pull it off. And I think that you're looking at, in the ending, there are some parts that didn't age particularly well. There's a little bit of unevenness, but I think that overall the effects work, and I think they're good. And there was nothing in here that was such a bad compositing job that I looked at it and said, "Oh, got the interns to work on this one." Or farmed it out, 2 weeks before you locked picture or something like that. So yeah, there's good effects.
Yeah, there's only a couple of moments where I'm like, I'm not sure that really works. And I think the biggest moment is when Tony is talking to Peter after what happened on the ferry, which the ferry scene looks really good, but there's that scene where you can just basically tell the whole backdrop is a blue screen, and it doesn't feel as composited as well as you would want it, so that it feels more real. But other than that, I think this movie does look pretty good, and it is a lot of fun effects-wise. And part of that is that they aren't just doing the same type of swinging shots that you've seen in every other Spider-Man movie. They are trying to do lots of different things. And part of that, too, is that we don't spend almost any time in Midtown Manhattan. We're all in like Queens and Brooklyn and, the smaller places of New York, so that we actually do feel like we're in a different type of Spider-Man movie, that we are with the neighborhood Spider-Man.
I do have to give the movie credit for the fact that whenever something's set in New York, it's always like on the island of Manhattan. And even when you're talking about New York City, you point out Brooklyn and Queens and stuff like that. Like, there are 5 boroughs. There's a whole lot of other New York to explore than the skyscrapers that from the main island. Get on over there. And so I'm just piggybacking on what you were talking about, where it's good that they treat the New York location as something more than Times Square and a couple of the familiar monuments. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a lot of fun. So, was there anything else about the movie that you feel like was there anything that you feel like has changed over time, or you feel like is in a better light, in a worse light?
I will say, actually, that No Way Home makes Homecoming better, which makes me love No Way Home even more, because the whole purpose of a sequel, a good sequel, is to elevate the original material.
Mm-hmm.
Godfather 2 does it, Empire Strikes Back does it, Terminator 2 does it. Like, there are all of these sequels that they elevate the previous work. And so the previous work seems even better by comparison. But while there is that lift, I'm still processing whether it's just because I loved No Way Home so much and it made so much payout of this, or just that I view it a little differently now. So maybe it's a mix of both, but yeah. I think No Way Home really, really helps this because Peter's journey, what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm absolutely with you on that front. And I think, as I admitted earlier, I think there were a couple of things that when I came into this movie that I was judging in a way that I wasn't allowing them to be able to take the character and, honestly do what they wanted with him. And, in the same way that I had done with Man of Steel and Superman. And so I was wrong in that. And so therefore, I see this movie in a different light, not just because of No Way Home, but I think being a little bit reflective on my own feelings at the time and not necessarily giving this film and what the MCU and Sony were trying to do with the character in light of the fact that, they're rebooting him very quickly after a few years. So, yeah, this is a different experience for me. And so I guess with that, John, it comes down to the question of what are you going to rate Spider-Man Homecoming?
I'm going to give it a 3. It was 2.5 before. I think our conversation helps suss out some of that feeling, but a 3, which it's not a bad rating, but it's just, it was 2.5. Now it's 3 thanks to No Way Home. What about you?
Yeah. This is going to be a 3.5. It went up from a 2.5. So it got a whole extra star from me.
Wow.
And mainly because I just, I enjoyed the movie more this time. And part of that was what I talked about, just kind of letting go of some things. And part of that is in retrospect of where we've come from with the fact that where I know we're going to go. And, I'm really thankful that we got No Way Home to be a movie that is elevating its previous material. That, again, like you said, that just shows how good that movie was. And so, ranking-wise, where is everything going to land for you now?
Winter Soldier stays at top. Iron Man 3, Ant-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Iron Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Doctor Strange, Captain America Civil War, Captain America First Avenger, The Incredible Hulk, and then right behind, like very close in terms of what would I be more willing, these rankings are what am I more willing to rewatch? Spider-Man Homecoming, and then Avengers, and then Thor The Dark World, and then Avengers Age of Ultron, which is eyeing greedily the attention that I give the last spot, racing toward it, if you will, with each passing, moment, as it casts its jealous eyes toward, in last place, Iron Man 2. What about you?
So we've got Winter Soldier, Iron Man 3, no, just kidding. Civil War, the First Avenger, and then we have Guardians of the Galaxy 2, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange, The Incredible Hulk, and there has been a major shift in my rankings. Spider-Man Homecoming.
Wow.
Then Guardians of the Galaxy.
Wow.
Then Avengers.
Oof.
Then Thor The Dark World. Iron Man 2. Thor. And of course, in the last spot where it should be on your list, Age of Ultron.
Oh, we're working there. We're getting there. Slowly coming to accept it.
But what's crazy is that Spider-Man Homecoming kind of used to be down there, like closer to the bottom of the list, and it moved towards the top of the list in the sense that, it's at the top half now. And so that's what these rewatches can do. And that's what a fantastic resolution to the quote-unquote Spider-Man trilogy that they've done can do as well. So, I mean, you make good movies, it can have an impact on the whole. So,
Indeed.
Well, John, if people do want to catch up with you and talk, maybe some Spider-Man or MCU, or maybe they want to see what else you've got going on, where can they find you?
You can hear me kick myself about selling Spider-Man issue number 300, illustrated by Todd McFarlane. Is it worth anything? No idea, but maybe I shouldn't have sold it anyway. You can find me as Castle Junkie online. You can find me Twitter, Letterboxd, Insta, blah, 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 all that stuff. And you can find me out there on other shows if you care to hear my ramblings on the Nerd Party Network. You can hear me on the House Lights podcast, where we look at the work of directors divided by decade or the entire body of work, what have you. And also on what I feel to be a terrific Star Wars show called Aggressive Negotiations, which I co-host with one Mr. Matthew Rushing.
which I think everybody should check out. Aggressive Negotiations. It's fantastic. You can also find me here on the TFM network doing the entire 6 Sub 2 Club, which, we've got this whole side of the network that doesn't have anything to do with Star Trek. And so we would appreciate you checking that out. It's in the same feed here as Assembling Avengers. So, of course, Snyder Cuts is there as well. You can also find me doing Literary Treks, The Orb, and Warp 5. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek. Warp 5 is about Star Trek Enterprise, and The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then you could find me over on the Nerd Party Network, not just with Aggressive Negotiations, but I do have a finished show that I did with Drea Kaufman. It's called Owl Post, and we talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. But thank you, of course, so much for joining us.
Avengers!